in beautiful Bali, Indonesia. For those of you joining us for the first time and online, Speak Up Monday is a #1 motivational talk show for entrepreneurs and social impact. We believe that people inspire people and that there is unity in diversity. Hence, we feature both foreigners and Indonesians alike. We are into our 4th year. This is episode 434. How amazing is that? And today, I'm your host, Bhavna Parihar, and tonight's show we are discussing what it means to champion healthy entrepreneurship and to break stigmas. What that means, but also what that doesn't mean, what that looks like, and how we can identify it for ourselves as a means to better understand the signs of working out of alignment and the mental health toll that takes, but also what societal stigmas we in society attach to that, and how ultimately we can break through and build ourselves differently. Joining me for this deep dive is my special guest and friend, Aishwarya Balaji, who will share her firsthand experience and how she has applied this not only to her own business, but to those for her clients to scale and grow sustainably in an aligned manner. Her experience is vast. She is a CEO and co-founder of A Fresh Sip, a startup helping people discover and access non-alcoholic alternatives in the US market. Aishwarya also runs a business consulting firm working specifically with entrepreneurs, many of you in the audience, and content creators on finding product market fit and scaling their business to run in an aligned and sustainable manner. With past experience ranging from a global consultant with PwC to being an angel investor and a founder of a Web3 innovation lab, a TEDx and global speaker, as well as a mentor, this has been truly her personal and professional journey. So please welcome tonight my guest and friend, Aishwarya Balaji.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so to kick us off, can you begin by sharing a little bit about your past, how you started in the industry, and what it was that appealed to you about that at the time?
Industry meaning the non-alcoholic space or just the startup world?
Let's start with startup to kind of give people a sense of where you were 5-10 years ago, and then we'll bridge that gap in terms of how you ended up here.
So I started my career out in management consulting. I worked at PwC. I was working in consumer products in the tech space, and I was splitting my time between Europe and in Manhattan. And that was a very interesting ride. You got to see kind of the end-to-end of big tech and big CPG, and I knew that I wanted to get into the startup space. And what I did was I actually talked to Techstars, which is a accelerator in the US market. Actually, it's pretty global now. And I talked to some of the founders in that space. I networked my way into being the first employee of an ed tech startup in the building industry, and I helped grow that out to about 70,000 users globally. And then I networked my way as a 23-year-old into angel investing. I still do not understand how I had so much passion and just gumption. I think I was like very much delusional. Yeah, it was like networking until you get what you want, and I just kind of had that delusional mindset. I think I've kind of grown out of that a little bit, but that's where I started my career. And from there, I really was looking and identifying where there were trends in the market, saw that Web3 was starting to pick up, and was really curious on how we could utilize emerging technology in the global development world. And somehow I ended up talking about that intersection a lot in New York City. And and nobody was talking about that intersection back then. People were talking about fintech and crypto. They weren't talking about that. And so I became that point person because I was talking about both global development as well as Web3. So that intersection point allowed me to actually set myself as a thought leader. And that led to me launching an innovation lab. And then I got really burnt out, accidentally moved to Bali, which a lot of people do. And from there, I started that next wave of my career, which was a combination of really building businesses in a very sustained manner that can really see growth, and at the same time making sure that people were doing that like in a very, very aligned way.
Okay, so understanding kind of like that trajectory that you had and sort of the full circle moment, and which is why we're here. For those of us and people in the audience and online who are, in the entrepreneurial space or in that tech space or in the startup world, can you kind of take us back and describe maybe 2 to 3 sort of signs that you started witnessing? Maybe they were part of the highs that you experienced in your career. Maybe they became the lows. But if you can kind of help illustrate and just kind of paint that picture of what it looked like when you were at the seemingly top top of your game.
Yes.
And what signs you start to maybe experience that made you question a little bit like, oh, this doesn't feel right for me.
Well, I will tell you, your body gives you a lot of signs when it's not the right move or it's not the right place to be. But before then, to paint a picture, I had moved from New York City to San Francisco to build a Web3 innovation lab in 2017. I was in my mid-20s, and I was surrounded by a lot of, let's say, interesting energy in that space at that time. And I was given the opportunity to speak around the world. I was also I had a chance to speak with the COO of Coinbase and Gavin Newsom, who was who's now the governor of California, and just really be in places where I had a lot of imposter syndrome as a mid-20-year-old to be in those rooms, and I still somehow was getting pulled into that. Gave a TEDx, like just everything that you wouldn't imagine your life would look like. That was what I was living, and I was miserable. The day I gave my TED Talk, right after it, I felt like, why am I, like, you know, what am I doing and what next? I couldn't even take that moment to savor that I had done, like I had accomplished something that I had dreamt about since I was little, and a lot of people dream about for a very long time. And it was very much, what's next? I also didn't think that I was credible. So I was taking a lot of advice from people that were quote unquote senior to me, or people that have built businesses. But at the end of the day, I'm the only one that knows my industry. And so it's really important that you build that relationship with yourself. I had not at that time. And so that was a part of all of the things that were happening in the background. And then slowly my body started to give out. I had so many health conditions come up. I had anxiety. I just wasn't in a very, very negative headspace. And
would you say that sort of when the way you talk about it, like you were this thought leader, you were this like SME in your space, and people were coming to you, and but you were young, and you know, I'm sure, and I want to understand more about this, that were there cultural, society sort of expectations and stuff put on you that you felt, okay, well, I need to keep doing this even though it doesn't feel right? I mean, it sounds like you were so trusted by the industry and by people, but you didn't actually really trust yourself and your body. So what was that conflict like for you?
It's interesting. So I'm Indian. So in the South Asian world, I really do feel that we are celebrated in terms of our achievements are celebrated. And so I felt like I had to continue to achieve these external things to feel like I was worthy. And I also didn't have a good understanding of who I was. It was more so what I thought I should be doing. And so when you're kind of approaching life with that lens, it isn't giving you exactly it's not giving you the satisfaction and the contentment that you think you would actually be receiving by achieving all these external factors. And so it was very much chasing that external validation more so than feeling content from the inside. And I think anytime you're building, whether it's something in your personal life or your professional life, when you're approaching it from a place of looking outside of yourself to get that like sustenance, it's not going to be sustainable. And you might be able to build something strong, but more than likely you're not going to be able to build it with longevity and be able to enjoy your life in that process.
And this is all obviously learnings you've come out years later. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking about maybe the person sitting here, or someone that knows someone, or someone who's tuning in online who is, 20-something years old in New York, in Silicon Valley, in that hustle culture, and is trying to get sort of those accolades and starting to feel like, okay, this is, I'm succeeding, this is excellence. And so what few, 2 to 3 sort of signs that you would say to kind of look out for in that moment that you know now that you didn't know then?
One, I would say if you're feeling fatigued, if you're feeling tired, like lean into that. Take time for yourself. And if you're not, like I think burnout comes in so many different shapes and forms. I would say if you feel scattered, if you find yourself doom scrolling and you're just constantly on social media, you're finding yourself comparing yourself to other people, or you're just not sleeping well, there's so many signs that your body gives, and generally your body will give you a bunch of small signs, and if you don't listen to them, they'll give you bigger signs and bigger signs and bigger signs. And so I would say more have conversations with yourself. Take it like, I think when you're running in the entrepreneurial world, it's very easy for your time to get eaten up by a million different things, and being able to take like a step back and say, okay, how was this week? How was this month? How was even this day? And reflect on like how you're feeling, and if you're feeling kind of in a centered place, and if you're not, then generally kind of see, are those temporary things, or are those things that like I've tried to fix? And if you've tried 3 or 4 times and you're not feeling better, then that's a sign of burnout.
Now, with that, though, as much as someone might, we understand those are things we should look for, there is always that notion of like, oh, I can, catch up on sleep on the weekend, and I'll rest on that vacation. And then there's also so much of the stigma that comes with saying that you're tired or you're stressed out or that you need to take a break. So what are some of those stigmas that you were starting to sort of feel and think about that you couldn't address until you hit what I guess would be your sort of breaking point, turning point, and then I want to hear more about that.
Well, I think it's celebrated to say that you're stressed and say that you're busy, and especially in like the hustle culture, right? Like, oh, I slept 2 hours in the last week. Why do we celebrate that? Oh, I'm eating ramen, living in my garage. Okay, great. Now what, right? And so I think that there's a lot of these, people are trying to show that they're grinding more, that they're working harder, and there is this unnecessary correlation between working hard and success, because there isn't a correlation, is what I'm trying to say, right? People think that if they are putting in 100 hours, 120 hours, like they're not sleeping, they're constantly networking, they're constantly on, that's going to give them a stronger return on their investment of whatever they're putting in. And that's just not the case. And so I think that is a really, really important realization that society's starting to actually acknowledge and recognize. But I still think that in so many places, we don't necessarily accept that.
So what was your point of sort of the burnout, that turning point moment that, as you said, you came to Bali, and so what had to happen, what had to break for you to decide I need to figure this out?
My body. Like, I had so many health conditions come up where I physically could not function and was almost hospitalized, and so that got pretty scary. So I had to make changes if I wanted my future to look different. And so that wasn't just changes with work, because there's stressors through work, but that's also the other stresses that are coming in to your body. So that was making changes in my health. That was cutting back on drinking alcohol, which was a big part of every social situation, every investor meeting, every networking meeting, changing my relationship with caffeine, non-toxic products, the whole gamut, and really focusing on my health and wellness, and recognizing that me investing time, money, energy into my well-being is a value add to my business success. And it's not a detraction, and it's not something that should be an afterthought. It's definitely something that should be a priority, and that's not just with yourself, but also the team that you're building. Giving people time in your team to actually to take care of themselves is going to make them be better employees, better contractors, better partners in the long run.
So how did that actually show up for you? So what steps did you start taking during this process of recognizing that your body is breaking down, not only I think from the personal physical level, but also the mental emotional level of what you had to do? If there's maybe a few methodologies or things that you start to apply to yourself that eventually made their way into your business.
One of the things that I was told to do was EFT Tapping. EFT Tapping is emotional freedom technique, and it really focuses on removing some subconscious beliefs. So I started working with a practitioner in that space and really kind of breaking my own limiting beliefs. I started going to therapy. I worked with a functional medicine practitioner as well as a naturopath. I did everything, and I took it under it was no longer an orange flag or an orange maybe slow down or a caution sign. This was a full red stop. And so I had to make those changes if I wanted my life to go back on track. And so after about 7 or 8 months of all of this, I did get my health completely back on track naturally. And then I realized that the last 2 things I was holding on to at the time was the relationship I was in, as well as the business that I had spent the last 3 years building. And so within the span of 1 month, I broke up with my boyfriend, and I shut my company down.
And so what year was this, just to give everyone some context?
This was November of 2019.
Okay, so then let's fast forward into, so that happens and you decide, I need to take a break and I'm gonna run off to Bali.
Well, right before that, I did a 10-day silent retreat. So if you guys are familiar, I did a Vipassana, which is, I like to talk, and being 10 days by myself with no electronics and like only my thoughts was a very, very interesting experience. Highly, highly recommend. But yes, after that, I said, I'm going to go to Bali for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I'm going to go back to Silicon Valley and get a job in big tech. I'm done with the startup world, and let's not look back. I did not listen to that, but...
So then, okay, so now let's paint the picture. So then you're here, you've started kind of working on all the parts of your body, all the self-development work that you need to do to kind of realign yourself and to reconnect with who you are and what you want to do. And you've also made that decision that, okay, I'm not going to go and take a job in Silicon Valley. So what was the moment there, the pivotal moment of what you decided to do next?
You know, it's really a full circle moment because I was actually sitting at Tropical Nomad in Canggu.
Shout out to Tropical.
When I had this realization, I was like 2.5 weeks into being here, and I was sitting with someone I had met earlier in the week, and we were talking about some big problems that the universe and the world was dealing with. Somebody overhears that conversation, comes up to me and says, hey, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Do you happen to do product market fit? I have been sitting here since 9 a.m. trying to figure out how to take this product and bring it to market. And I was like, yeah, like that's kind of my bread and butter. I've been doing that in the States for a while. And he asks to grab coffee. 2 coffees later, he's like, can you help me do this? And that was a very aha moment, like, whoa. I've spent the last, 5 years at that time building what I was building, and I've learned a lot. I've networked a lot. I know a lot of frameworks that allows people to go from point A to point B. When you're running an innovation lab, you need to know how to take something from 0 to 1. And so then I started, that was my first client. I never thought I was going to be back in the consulting or the coaching space, and it just kind of came to me, which, Mama Bali does give you that sometimes.
Okay, so now that sort of kind of, I guess, kicked off you thinking, okay, I can apply my experience, my wisdom, expertise in a way that feels more natural to me. And then from there to leaving Bali, what happened next in terms of business, life? How are you now integrating all of what you had here in this like safe bubble that we have back in the States, back in Silicon Valley? What did you do then? So to give you a time frame, this is March 2020 that I fly back to San Francisco. And so we are right at that beginning of COVID. And I have a couple clients, and I'm like, I guess I'm doing this because the world, I don't really know what this is going to look like. And I realized that a lot of the work that I was starting to research was around perfectionism, was around like fear of failure, and just a lot of these like major limiting beliefs. And I started to apply a lot of that knowledge to the people that I was working with. And so some of my clients were 7-8 figure startups that were expanding market segments, but I also was working with entrepreneurs that were just starting out and really just needed the frameworks to go from 0 to 1. And what I realized in that process was that there's an abundance of information on technically how to build something out there. So then why do people struggle with building startups? Why do people struggle with going from 0 to 1? And it's generally because of the blocks that they're putting in from themselves. I am not sure if this is ready. Let me get a product, created first before I put it into market. People weren't really testing to see what the consumer wanted. They were really focused on actually building something first. There's a lot of internal biases and restrictions and limitations that are kind of standing in the way. And I think it was very, very important for them and for my clients to really, really dig into that first. And so it was actually reframing a lot of those conversations and saying, hey, we have to do the internal work first, and if we do that, we're not going to be facing resistance every step of the way. Because if we don't, and we try to, just focus on the business frameworks first, every single step, you are going to be faced with yourself.
essentially.
So basically just helping them understand their own limiting beliefs, helping them kind of get out of their way, identifying those blocks, removing those blocks, and then how do we move and grow in a way that is healthy for them and for the business. Now, speaking of healthy, you mentioned before that one of the things as part of that culture, part of the startup world, part of just any sort of business world is this, drinking culture. And, you're constantly having drinks. It's how you network. It's how you make connections. And you mentioned how you had to make a shift for your health reasons. And, we also know that a fresh sip is from that. So how did you start to remove those blocks for yourself, knowing that, okay, if I'm going to be in the room with these people and this is what I need to do, and how did you discover, how was a fresh sip born from that?
Yeah, so I didn't have really like a choice. Like if my health wasn't doing well, I didn't want to add more toxins into it. So it was more like, I'm not going to drink for a period of time. And that was kind of where I went in with it. And so I had to learn how to navigate social situations without depending on alcohol as a crutch. I really wasn't planning on building a business around it. Fast forward to mid-2020, because I've been a part of the startup world for so long, I think one of my gifts or my genius is identifying trends before they go mainstream. And one of the things that started to grow was the appetite for non-alcoholic alternatives. And generally speaking, these trends the CPG trends hit Europe before they hit the States. And so now being in the States, I saw this trend starting to pick up. The first few non-alcoholic alternatives start to hit the market in the EU, and I was curious if that mindset shift had hit the US market. And so what we did in a very low touch way, where I was also like, I don't want to build a startup. I was like, I just want to see if this is a real market. Built a small community on Instagram, and it was very, very sticky. People were like, thank you for creating a safe space where we are normalizing optionality within drinking culture. We weren't saying being sober is right. We weren't saying drinking is wrong. We were saying there are so many reasons why somebody might not want to have a drink on one night. There are so many reasons people might not want to drink at all. Alcohol is the one thing people focus on. Why are you not indulging versus why are you indulging, right? And so that was a very aha moment when we realized how desperate people were for that shift. I think a lot of people felt obligated or pressured into having a drink. And so to create a space where people could say, oh, wow, the culture is shifting. And also mind you, this was 2020, 2021, where we were all stuck in confined spaces. And so this relationship with alcohol was very polarizing for people. Some people were on Zoom happy hours all the time. And some people said, I'm by myself, I don't need a drink. So that became even more polarizing. And with anything in business, I think when you're building something that's consumer facing, you have to find that trigger point that's really getting people to make a shift. And that's how you're going to sell to them. That's how you know there's a real market. And I think that the pandemic was a big trigger for people to actually question their relationship with alcohol. And that awareness was that first piece in us building what today is a fresh sip.
And so in doing that and questioning that, you also had for yourself, I think, to question, how am I going to build this?
Or do I want to build this?
And do you want to build this? And if you are, how are you going to build it that doesn't go against all the learnings that you've had, all the work that you've done coming from the industry you had? So take us through that. How did you apply your approach to deciding to build and how to build?
So I think, actually a lot of entrepreneurs associate their self-worth with the success or the failure of their business. And this is because when you are living and breathing only your business, your identity, it's very, very easy for your identity to get tied up into that. You're always talking about it's an extension of yourself. If someone says something negative about your business, it's like they're saying something negative about you. And so I was very, very acutely aware that that's not the energy that I wanted to bring into what we were building at a fresh sip. Number two, with one of the clients that I was working on at the time, I had brought on my now co-founder, and we realized we worked really well together. We went to college together, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest getting into business with your friends, but because we had the opportunity to work together, I realized that we have a very, very incredible, we have very aligned values, but very different skill sets. And we both had health conditions that led us to cutting back on drinking alcohol, so we had a very personal passion associated with the space. And so we really allowed the consumer base, the customer base, to dictate what the business looked like. And oftentimes, when you attach your self-worth to building your business, you're building it from a place of ego, rather than building it based off of what the consumer wants, based off of what the market's telling you. And so the first thing that we did was say, we are doing this part-time. We are not, because once you start to add that financial burden on it, it becomes a whole nother game as well. And so we said, we're starting with the community. The community started to get really excited, got really loyal. And so the community says, hey, there's so many products entering the market. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to try. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And so we said, okay, why don't we build a platform that helps people navigate the non-alcoholic market in the US? So in 2021, we launched a platform, and we realized that it's not just about beverages that are alcoholic or alcohol-free. It's pregnant-friendly, gluten-free, halal certified, all of the different nuances that people might want to look for. We wanted to create the one-stop shop for that. We're not formulators, so we didn't want to go and build our own beverage. We knew the market was new and nascent and that it was growing. So why don't we be a pillar of support for that growing ecosystem?
And then how did you take that approach to having the community tell you what they need and go to find it? How do you apply that to the clients you work with, like the entrepreneurs, the consulting work that you do, to these other individuals who have maybe identified what they think they should be doing or how they should be doing it? How do you help kind of course correct or build in those frameworks for them?
Hypothesis testing is the most important thing that an entrepreneur can do. You have to test every single concept and every assumption that you are making. And once you validate that assumption, it can send you so far. The worst place an entrepreneur can be is to have an untested assumption, because you're basically thinking that the market or your audience will respond in a certain way, and you haven't proven that in one direction or the other. If the market tells you no, that's amazing, because then you can course correct and pivot accordingly. But the worst place to be is to have 50 assumptions that you've now made and have them all be untested, put in 50 grand, and then not actually have any of that translate into value. So one of the first things we do is say, okay, what do you believe, and what assumption is that hypothesis made out of? And then you go and create the lowest barrier of testing methodologies to go and actually test that. You do not want to spend 10 grand creating an app when you don't even know if people would bite, right? Maybe it's easier for you to create a fake landing page and see if you can build a wait list. Maybe you go on a bunch of Facebook groups or Reddit threads and post anonymously and see who bites and who's experiencing something similar. And the best businesses to build are businesses where people are looking or have already hacked an alternative to, because you know that there's enough of a need and a pain point there that you can actually create something new. And so one of the most important things I ask entrepreneurs that I work with is the market pulling from you, or are you pushing this on them? You want to be building, your life is so much easier if you're building a product or a business that the market's pulling from you. It is an uphill battle if you have to educate or convert the market. And speaking of education, in our space, we don't focus on convincing people that non-alcoholic beverages are good. We focus on the people that want the non-alcoholic beverages. The education piece is an uphill battle, and it's also something that society will naturally kind of figure out on their own. So it's better to cater to the market that already exists than be the ones having to convince people that the market should exist.
So with that approach, because I imagine with clients, and because this is probably a lot easier to apply to yourself, because this is very much embodied based on how you work and your expertise. And when you're applying this to the people you work with, or any of us in this room, what are some of the, I guess, the stigmas or the ideas? Because so much of it we get attached to, well, we know that we have this answer, we have this product that we know is going to be amazing. And so how do you kind of break through some of the mental barriers that people might have, or what they want to do and how they want to bring it to the world?
I ask them the questions they don't want me to ask, which is usually, how do you know that the market wants it? And then they'll usually give me some wishy-washy answer of an anecdote of one person that said that they would buy this product if it existed. But have they put their money there? A lot of people will say, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Especially your friends, because they want to support you. But have people pre-ordered? Have people bought something similar? Have people spent hours building something to solve the problem that you think exists, right? Are people willing to pay for it? Are people willing to do something about it, right? And so I think it's like, one is really confronting asking those confronting questions. And sometimes it's the opposite, where it's, well, I think this should exist, but I'm nervous to put it in front of people, right? And it's like, what if people don't like it? Well, that's okay, right? Like, people are so scared of failure, but like every entrepreneur that you know has failed 1,000,000 times before they've seen an inch of success. And so it's really setting yourself up for, your failing is setting yourself up for success.
And did that come into play when you decided to approach First Up the way you did, when it came to raising capital or not raising capital, and the, I guess, expectations that were placed on you coming back into the market and bringing something to the market? What did that look like? Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to raising capital, I had raised a little bit of capital when we were building our Web3 Innovation Lab. And I've also been on the other side. And there are a lot of strings attached when you're raising venture capital. You're not working for yourself anymore. You're working for someone else. And so it's really, really important to not get caught up in the flashy TechCrunch news titles that says so-and-so raised 100 million, 50 million, whatever. I know a lot of those founders, and they've either taken their company and brought it to the ground because they weren't thoughtful enough, or they're miserable in the process because now they're basically an employee. And so one thing was, I knew that I did not want to burn out again. And so I had to be 150% sure that whatever I was building made sense for me in the long term and the short term, and I wanted the flexibility to be able to approach that. And I also was loving what I was doing on the coaching and consulting side, and I felt that as soon as I raised venture capital money, I wouldn't be able to do that. And so until I was like 150% certain I wanted to go in that direction, I wasn't going to take a dime. And so that set us up. That sent us in a different direction, which was, how are we going to build something in a very bootstrapped way and get the buy-in of the U.S. market, and do it in a way that's not going to be capital intensive. And so we didn't build our own inventory until this year. We didn't get our warehouse until this year. We piggybacked off of other players who were technically competitors in our space. And we said, hey, let's share a warehouse. You do our fulfillment, even if that means we are taking tiny razor-thin margins. But let's at least start building the engine and then see if there's enough demand. We did a lot of pop-ups. We've done pop-ups with New York Fashion Week, with Netflix, with South by Southwest. We did it across the board because, again, we wanted to see who the customer was, who actually cared about this market, and why did they care, right? It's not just do they care, why do they care? Because that's going to inform the positioning and the marketing and everything as well. And so from there, we got more and more clarity. Until this year, and when we realized, okay, this is the game plan of how we can scale. And now that, and the second question is, do you want to scale? Or do you want this to be a small business on the side? And so that's a question that me and my co-founder have had every 2 to 3 months, probably 4 times a year. We ask ourselves, what are we building, and do we still want to be building it? Because that question can change, and it's okay for that question to change. Because if you're building something and you don't want to be building it anymore, you're not the right person to be building it. So, I mean, there's such a strong, coming from you, just this resolve, and part of it I think is because you were broken down, literally, physically, that nothing after that you would allow that to kind of cost you that inner peace and that inner sort of sanctity of your body, because coming through from you, you're so resolute in what you will say yes to and what you will say no to, and how you're going to build if you want to build. So just a couple things, and I just want to, we have an amazing full audience here who I know have some questions based on the earlier chat, so want to give an opportunity for that. So get those questions percolating, and just know that if there's a question that you have, someone probably has it too, so don't be shy, you have full access. So I can give you guys a minute to think about that. I would love to hear just kind of, because it's such a beautiful sort of confidence that's coming through, and I imagine that isn't always there on a daily basis.
No.
So what is it that, if you had to say, what does Aishwarya say yes to now, and what does she say absolutely no to now when she's approaching business or a client or an idea?
I wish there was a formula that I could prescribe to all of you. There isn't. It's actually just having a conversation with yourself and taking the time to reflect. So I'll give you a really quick example. I was at an investor dinner during South by Southwest, and about 45 minutes, I stayed for the full 2 hours, but 45 minutes through, I realized I wasn't my best self. And this is on reflection. I wasn't making the best impression anymore, but because I was so tired, it was just a very busy week, and I should have left 45 minutes through, because if I meant to meet that investor, I will meet them some other time. Someone else will make an intro, something will happen. I have full trust in the universe, and so kind of surrendering and kind of saying I should have stepped back, right? Because you have one chance to make that first impression, and I should have honored my own energy at that time instead of being like, oh my God, there's all these people, and now we're considering raising, and so it's best for me to spend the time, making these connections. No. And it's funny because after that dinner, the most important people that I met were the first two people that I talked to when I walked in. They were handed to me. And so really, again, having that faith that whatever direction we're going in, as long as it's coming from that aligned place, then you're golden. You can't really fail. And so, again, asking yourself, asking your co-founder, because we're I have a co-founder, right? We're both equally a part of this team, and I wouldn't want to put her in a position where I'm letting her down or she's letting me down. And especially when you're building it with one of your closest friends, you have to have even more transparency in that process. And so that would be one of the first things that I would say.
And then just one last on that, and then I'm going to give it over to the audience. How would you say being back in that market, in the US market, in many of these environments, how do you sort of tune out that noise so that you can ask yourself these questions and listen to yourself? Because it's one thing to say that when you're in that, to look back at it now, but how would you, if you had to impart some of that guidance to someone who's in those rooms or in those environments and probably sees that it could lead them in the wrong direction, how do you sort of block out the society commentary, the cultural commentary, the industry commentary?
I would be lying if I said it was easy for me to do that all the time. But I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of smokes and mirrors, and there has been things that have happened in our industry for over the last couple of years where I thought some of the strongest players were going to be the ones that really stayed in the game, and things happened, and they're no longer in that place. And I questioned it because they had raised a ton of money and they were building a really flashy business, and I was like, are we doing the wrong thing? But we still exist, they do not. And there are so many things that have come out in that process, right? And so it's, again, being so, you can't be going in the wrong direction if you're asking yourself the right questions and you're asking them periodically, because you're changing as a person as well, right? And so I think, I keep saying that, but it's so true. And again, if you're building, a lot of people come to me and they say, hey, I want us to raise a bunch of capital, I want us to build an IPO-ready business, and I'm like, great, I can help you with that, but do you know what sacrifices you need to give up in order to do that? The time with your friends and family, because then they say, I also want to be living in Bali, and I also want to be living here, and I want to be doing this XYZ. I'm like, then maybe we can still build a business, but maybe you want to build something that's self-sustaining and not something that's going to require a ton of external capital. And so it's really looking at what are the elements that matter to you in your life holistically. It's very much like you take a functional medicine approach versus going directly to a surgeon. Sometimes you want to go to a surgeon because you need to get something extracted, but sometimes you want to look at yourself as a whole and be able to prescribe something to serve that entirety.
Yeah, I think it's kind of taking that personal blueprint and professional blueprint and like meshing them together and seeing where are the priorities when you take away the relationships. What do you want to do when you enter them back in? What does that look like and where does that place you?
Absolutely.
Okay, so with that, I want to give our opportunity to our audience.
Hi, everyone. Okay, thank you very much. What a brilliant interview. You know, there's so much great knowledge and actionable intel that's so true and real that I'm sure people here are getting some really great insights. I definitely am, right? I can't wait to watch this back and kind of really embody most of what you're saying. So going back to one thing you mentioned about, which I really appreciate, which is this understanding that if you're supposed to meet them, you're going to meet them, right? Because how many of us here have probably stayed in that room, right? Yeah. Way past the time when we should have already gone home, right? In this belief like, well, we're going to meet this person and it's all going to work out, right? So the belief is a huge part of you, right? And my question then is, so people sitting around here, and I know part of what your journey was to self-belief, but everybody's individual. But if you had to give some advice for entrepreneurs or founders here saying, hey, this could be a framework for you to really believe in yourself, what would you say? Like which steps, if any, would you say, try to follow this and see how it goes for you?
I think the first thing, and that's a really, really great question. There's so many things that I could say too, but the first thing is actually taking the time to build awareness with yourself. And so we, as a society, act in autopilot a lot, where we're just doing things kind of unconsciously. And I think it's bringing awareness to your thoughts and your actions. Also, the second thing what I would say is being able to distinguish between fear and intuition. And that's a really, really challenging one, but it's a very, very powerful one, right? Because oftentimes we feel like anxiousness, or you feel something in the pit of your stomach and you think that's fear, but maybe that's your intuition telling you something. And so the more and more you bring awareness to that, the more and more you'll be able to distinguish that, because it's not the easiest thing to distinguish, but once you do, it's a superpower. And then the third thing I'll say is lean into your genius. I can speak to the Western world, where like in the States, in school, we are taught to focus on getting everybody to a level playing field. So if you are excelling at English and you are just terrible at math, they're not going to focus on making you a poet or a writer. They're going to focus on getting you to become an average math student. And so we are not really taught in that world to be better at what we're good at. And that's our natural gift. And oftentimes we think that everybody else has that same natural gift. And so one of the most powerful lessons that I give to my clients, and I'll share this with you all today, is go to your various circles. Ask your friends, your families, people that you work with, when I walk into a room, what do I bring to that room? And ask them to describe you with a couple adjectives. And don't give them time to think about it. You'll notice that there's a pattern across the board with all the people that you talk to, and that's essentially your essence. You can probably boil that down to 3 to 5 words, and know that that is your innate power, and show up with that everywhere you go.
Boom! God damn!
Love that.
Questions? Raise your hands, guys. Questions? Yep, over this way. Remember, with this mic, just put it towards your mouth, not down here.
Is this mic working?
Yeah, it's working.
You didn't talk about the product itself, and I'm curious about it. I mean, are you drop shipping the product, or do you have inventory? How are you marketing it? Are you using Facebook ads?
Yeah, so
all the nitty gritty of introducing product.
Absolutely. So we're essentially aggregators and distributors in the non-alcoholic market. So we have a warehouse, we have a marketplace, we kind of curate over 80 or 90 brands in the beverage market, and we sell online. We also are going into micro retail in the U.S. market, so we will be available for people to actually try these products in spaces that they're already frequenting. So the biggest challenge for the non-alcoholic space is there's been over 1,000 beverages that have entered the market in the last 4 years, and with beverage, it's something that people really do need to try. So that discovery and that access problem is continuously one of the biggest challenges. So to support the brands and to support the customers, we are kind of bridging that gap through micro retail and online distribution.
Is the product like your beer? Is that what the product is?
So we do carry non-alcoholic beer, but we carry non-alcoholic wine, we carry mixed cocktails, we carry tequila alternatives, whiskey alternatives, adaptogenic cocktails. It's very much things that you would, like, there's some that would emulate alcohol and some that will give you the buzz without the buzz. And so very much this new category of drinks where people are able to get an elevated cocktail that still takes the same level of sophistication, has gone through an extensive process to be able to be created, that is sippable. So that's generally the products that we carry.
Hi, so I see that you're the founder of the drink, and then you're also the founder of the Daesh Consulting. Could you please tell me a little bit more about the consulting? So how do you divide the time, and what is your input in the two, and how did you get into that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my consulting and coaching firm, as I said, when I lived in Bali, and I naturally let it grow into whatever people wanted. I first was taking clients of all sorts, and now I work specifically with like smaller entrepreneurs. I don't take as many like full-fledged startup clients anymore, and I work with content creators as well in terms of figuring out like their value add and how to build a product or a service or a business around that. And then also like a big part of helping people find product market fit and finding scale is kind of breaking down their own limiting beliefs. So actually kind of on the esoteric side, I got trained as an EFT tapping practitioner. I've done my yoga teacher training. I've done a lot of methodologies or modalities in that space, and I utilize that in terms of helping people break down any of those patterns to achieve business success. And in the second part of your question was, how do I split time? It's kind of switched. I started out being 100% that and like 0% a fresh sip, and now it's kind of switched to where I'm 85% a fresh sip, and I have actually toned a lot of my clients down on the Aish consulting side just because of my bandwidth. So I take right now 2 to 3 clients at a time, but more it's a challenge, to be honest, and I would love to get to a place where I can take on more, but right now we are getting to a really we're going to a really interesting inflection point with the fresh sip where most of my time does need to be dedicated to that, so I have had to kind of take a step back on the consulting side. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your sharing. It gives me so much insight. You said like it is okay to change the why of everything, right? Like why do you make this business, and maybe even it changed also. People change, your value also change. What I want to ask is, do you think people change, or they just become more aware of themselves?
That's a great question. I think a little bit of both. I think your essence stays the same. And so that essence exercise that I had suggested, if you did that when you were 5 and you did that when you were 20 and you did that when you're 30 or 40, I'm sure that a lot of those words would stay the same, because at the core, I think you are like the same. However, how that manifests can change depending on what life stage you're in, what you want to be a priority. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, right? And I think at the end of the day, you want to be building a business, or you want to be working a 9 to 5. You want to be doing it where you are feeling like you are running the ship rather than the ship is running you. And so whatever steps you need to do to create the structure for that to come true is what's in your power. I don't know if that completely answered your question. It did? Okay.
Okay, two quick ones. Well, one's not quick. So for people sitting here, maybe I look to my right, I see Kath and Hero Beverages. So if somebody wanted to be taken on board as a client with a non-alcoholic beverage, what's the process for them to submit or to ideally become a client of yours?
It to be carried on our platform, one, the most important thing is it needs to be available in the U.S. market. That's the biggest challenge, probably. The number two is we would probably want to see that there is an audience and that there is like an excitement with the markets that we are selling the most in, and we would probably, and then third would be if it's a fit, we would probably do a test run and see if it makes sense for us to keep on board. And so those would be the three steps that I would say.
Cool. And the other one, which is a bit longer, so EFT, I was doing self-tapping, right?
Yes.
So it might be interesting for people just to maybe just go through the basics of what
Sure.
it is so they get an idea, because I think it's an incredibly powerful modality.
Absolutely. I love EFT tapping, and actually that's the part of my consulting that I've still kept open a little bit more, because it's easier for me to do a couple one-off EFT tapping sessions than it is for me to take on an entire business client. But EFT tapping, for those that do not know, the emotional freedom technique is based on the like meridian system. So if you've done acupuncture, it's looking at the same like energy channels as acupuncture. And the idea is when you experience something, you experience it in three ways. You experience it mentally, you experience it emotionally, and you experience it physically. And oftentimes we focus on ridding ourselves or like moving on mentally. We focus on moving on emotionally. But think about a situation that you think you've processed, and now you're confronted with that person or that situation again. You feel like something in your body where you're like, oh, I didn't process this as much as I thought I did. And that body sensation is that we have also experienced that physically. And EFT tapping focuses on breaking the pattern or the limiting belief that we have broken, that we have put into our body. And so we focus on like, tapping different meridian points and actually saying statements that are associated with it. So I generally ask a bunch of questions saying, hey, what are you working on? What are you trying to rid yourself of? And then I will start to kind of dive through. And what's really interesting about EFT tapping is once you break a pattern, it doesn't come back. Now, there might be a web of patterns that are associated with one belief, but every pattern that we break, you completely get rid of it. I got attacked by a pigeon 10 years ago, and I was deathly afraid of pigeons. And I did a 2-hour tapping session with my teacher. I am actually not afraid of pigeons anymore. I don't like them, but I am not afraid of them. So I can attest that it works for fears and like that as well. So going back to the actual tapping modality, one of the questions I get a lot is, oh, well, like, aren't you supposed to say positive statements? And there's a lot of TikTokers and people saying, like, EFT tapping, focusing on positive statements. And yes, that works. However, you actually have to focus on negative statements first. And so the reason why is if you want to say, like, I am the most incredible person in the world, you can say that all day long. You probably don't believe it. And so what EFT tapping does is actually makes you say the statements that make that bigger statement feel untrue. The negative statements that make the larger positive statement feel untrue. And as we start getting rid of those smaller negative statements, that bigger statement starts to feel more true. And so that's kind of what you're trying to put into your body. Also, like the physical blocks that you might feel through pain, also kind of sometimes comes from these physical beliefs that have layered on. So a very interesting modality. A lot of the tapping that I do is around like fear of being seen, fear of failure, a lot of like imposter syndrome, money mindset. There's so many things when you're building a business. So like people can sell other people's businesses, but they have problems selling their own business, right? And so it's like, what are those situations that have created that pattern in your life? And so I don't know if that's kind of answering your question, but that's a little bit of an overview for EFT tapping. But I love talking about this stuff, so if you want to learn more, feel free to message me.
One more? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about the market for non-alcoholic beverages.
Sorry?
I'm curious about the market for...
The market.
I mean, certain countries like, obviously you're not going to do very well in Ireland, but you might do well in Indonesia because it's a Muslim country. Are there any surprises that you found with us?
Yes. So most of the data that I have, I will say, is more US and Europe based. But one of the most interesting things that I found is that most of our market are people that consume alcohol. So you would think that non-alcoholic consumers are people that are sober. And yes, that's partly the market. But this went from 82% to 94% in the last year of people that consume these products are people that also consume alcohol. And so maybe people are pregnant, maybe they don't want to, maybe they're switching off even the same night, right? There's so many reasons people might not drink alcohol. And so that was a really interesting finding. And then the other thing that was quite interesting is that we are seeing a rise of ready-to-drink beverages also enter the market more and more. And so in terms of direct-to-consumer, the non-alcoholic liquors and non-alcoholic wines and beers that are a little bit more complex, we're seeing people go direct B2B and sell them to hospitality spaces, restaurants, the whole 9 yards. But in terms of direct-to-consumer, people want things that they don't have to think about. And so getting something that you can just pop open, it seems to be something that people are more interested in.
And last question.
Is it working? Yeah. What do you want to drink? No, the last question, I don't know if it's the last question, but I might miss a few things, but you very often said you have to ask yourself these questions. So maybe you have 5 of them.
So when I say asking yourself questions, it's, do I want to be here? Do I want to be doing what I'm doing? Do I want to be doing what I'm doing and the way I'm doing it? What do I want my future to look like? Am I willing to look at the opportunity cost? Am I willing to sacrifice what it's going to take for me to get there? And is that going to give me sustained happiness? There's a lot of questions, and we can keep going down, but it's having that discussion with yourself, right? I think that's the biggest thing, is actually taking the time to ask those questions. And also having those discussions with the people that are in your team as well, right? You want to build a company culture that attracts the smartest, the most brilliant, the most interesting, and the most passionate minds. Then you need to also be creating an environment where you're letting them thrive and you are not creating a community or a business of contraction. People want to feel empowered. People want to feel like their personal missions are also important to the business that they're building, and they're going to show up so much more. I love, we don't have any full-time employees outside of me and my co-founder, but every contractor, every intern, every agency that we've brought on, that we had this connection from the beginning has shown up for us tenfold. The ones that we questioned, again, should have listened to my intuition, were the ones that didn't stand the test of time. So again, it's even for myself, I'm asking those questions all the time, and sometimes I let fear get the best of me and I'll go in one direction, and then it's kind of reining it back in.
Well, but the contrast is, I think, from our mind, or many of us from the mindset is, well, you have to.
Why?
Well, I have to, I don't know, I have about 30, 40 employees. I have to.
Have to do what?
Yeah, I have to do this and this step that I can pay their salaries.
So again, you're making an assumption that you have to do X, Y, and Z, right? So yes, you do have to pay them, but is there only one way to pay them, right? I have to, yes, it's not saying don't show up for work. Yes, you do have to pay them, and sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do, but is there another way for me to serve, or do I need that many employees, right? If you're feeling do I have to, then there's something internally that's saying there's some sort of disconnect. And so it's being able to identify what that disconnect is, and then ask yourself, is this is the question changing something structurally? Is the question bringing somebody externally in, right? Because sometimes if you feel like you have to do something again and again, then maybe you want to bring somebody else on that gets to do that wants to do that, and you do the things that you get to do and you want to do, right? And so there's a lot, like, we assume that as a CEO we have to do X, Y, Z. A CEO, like, there's so many prescribed titles, and I say throw a little bit out. Like, yes, there are some, tried and true methodologies, but also give yourself space to be creative and create new structures and test them. Nothing has to be permanent, right? You can test it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, go back to what you did before. But at least you tried to change that framework a bit.
Well, I like this one part already. Nothing has to be permanent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Okay, and so with that, I mean, I think one of the beauties of having this live talk show here with an audience is that we get to engage, we get access to an amazing speaker, get access to a dynamic audience. We want to allow for more of that once the cameras stop rolling. So with that, I'm going to wrap us up. I want to just thank a few people. First of all, for those of you who are new, I want to thank Brother Rob here. He is the founder of Speak Up Monday and has been hosting this every Monday, rain or shine, for the last 4+ years. And kind of to the point that Aish mentioned earlier about knowing your genius. And it was something that Rob allowed me to explore by being up on the stage, bringing people together, giving access to friends and peers in my network that I felt whose stories would benefit someone else. So thank you, Rob, for allowing that for me. And the reason why it's on a Monday is actually because in Rob's personal network, there were several people that had taken their life. And as we know, statistically, Monday is the highest rate of suicide. So this is not just a video podcast or an audio podcast. It is an in-person live talk shows that people have a place to come to every Monday where they can feel seen, heard, connect, be inspired, be challenged. And that's why we're here today. So thank you, Rob. Also, we wouldn't be actually doing it physically here, nor would we be able to stream it and have all of the technical know-how without our amazing technical team at Tropical Nomad. So thank you so much, guys, for just doing what you do every single Monday. And then thank you to our audience. We have a full house here, and as someone who's sitting up here can say, looking out at what would be an empty room really changes the vibe and the dynamic. We're not sitting in a studio where it's meant to be just the two of us. So having you all here, taking time out of your Monday to join us for a conversation, to ask questions, and hopefully take something away with you or for someone else means a lot. So thank you to our amazing audience for being here. And last but not least, to my incredible guest. I mean, she is a friend, so we've had this personal journey as well. And to have her sit here and share what's happened in the last 4 years, and in some ways 10 years, I look at you and I sort of, that quote comes to mind that your past is a place of reference, not residence. And I think that you continue to embody that in the way that you're speaking and sharing with everyone. So thank you for allowing us to be witness to your full circle moment and for sharing the stage with me today. And with that, some final thoughts from you, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, first of all, thank you so much to Rob, Speak Up Monday, and Bhavna for holding this space. And thank you for everyone to show up. I truly wasn't sure if we were going to be by ourselves or not. And so I'm really happy we're not. But I had such an amazing time here. One of my favorite quotes that has gotten me through a lot is, "You have overcome 100% of the obstacles in your life." And that quote is really special because that's 100% success rate, a 0% failure rate. So every obstacle that you have in front of you, you know you're going to get past it because you have done that a million times before. And so anytime you're facing like some sort of challenge, like lean into that power and let that give you some resolve.
Amazing. And with that, we're done. Thank you, guys. Thank you.